Well everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the iPad Pro 2018 model, the 11-inch and 12.9-inch model, and see if these particular iPads are still, worth buying in 2024. Now, I love these iPads when they first came out, and I will still tell you for the average person out there, these iPads are still very relevant. This is actually still my go-to iPad that I use on an everyday basis, and for the most part, I'm still very, very happy and very excited about it because these are very good quality iPads that a lot of people still like and a lot of people still enjoy using, and I'm still a humongous fan of it for sure. So if you want to pick up some iPads that I would recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the iPad Pro 11-inch model, these ones had the 11-inch displays on the front, but you were also getting the 12.9-inch model as well. And it really just kind of depends on which particular device you preferred. Me personally, I think the 11-inch is perfect for me. It's like portable and it's like, a big size iPad, but you can also get the 12.9-inch one that was giving you a little bit of a better display too in some ways. These ones were giving us an IPS LCD panel with 120 Hz displays. This again in and of itself was another very cool thing going on for these particular devices. Personally for me, if I'm running through and if I'm getting some sort of device, I love having these types of iPads that are giving you 120 Hz displays. These are very nice iPads from that particular standpoint. And when I look at this type of display, when I look at the current iPads, I'm actually very surprised how good these iPads kind of hold up against those current iPads. I mean, these were the first ones to completely remove the bezel and basically remove everything around it. And you have to kind of keep in mind in the back of your head, that in and of itself is another super crazy thing going on here too. So I love this iPad from that standpoint, like a little tiny bit of bezel around it, but it still looks very, very good for sure. On the bottom of this iPad, you are getting USB Type-C, and this was also another very big change. The fact that we did have USB-C on this thing was crazy, and I do think that in and of itself is another amazing thing going on for this particular iPad from that standpoint. You're still maintaining the headphone jack and everything. On the back side, you're getting that standard type of, back. It's a single camera setup on the top left corner, getting the Apple logo in the center. And beyond that, there's really not anything else like super crazy going on with this iPad that we haven't already seen before. It still is like a very, very good looking iPad for sure. The only big thing to keep in mind on the outside that's kind of a negative was that these iPads were kind of notorious of somewhat being kind of like this weird type of iPad, meaning that these things may not have been like the best feeling ones, and sometimes they could have like actually bent pretty fast. That was kind of a big issue when we were getting these types of iPads at that time, but I will say over time they've gotten a little bit better, not necessarily the build quality, but I do think for the most part a lot of people have kind of gotten used to them and they kind of fixed them in some ways. But for the most part, like I mentioned, these were kind of some issues that you were running into if you were getting these types of iPads. So again, kind of keep that in mind, but regardless, it still is like a very good looking iPad on the outside. The price tag of these iPads are also a little bit interesting as well. They're not as expensive as they used to be. So because of that, when you're getting this type of iPad, you're going to be getting one that really isn't terrible. It's going to be holding up fairly well from the, price tag standpoint. So I do think like if you're going through and if you're buying some sort of an iPad, you're going to be getting one that's going to be holding up fairly well from that price tag standpoint, which I think is actually very, very important. Personally for me, as I mentioned before, if I'm going to go through and buy an iPad, I want to not only buy an iPad that has a good build quality and everything, but also going to stand up well from the price tag standpoint. And if I were to buy this thing today, I'm pretty sure I could be able to like resell this thing in the future, probably like a year or two from now, for roughly around the same price, maybe a little bit more, but like it wouldn't be that far off, which again, I think is like a pretty important thing to keep in mind here with this particular iPad. So beyond that, that kind of covers it up here for the most part, at least from the exterior side. Now, from the other side, when it comes down to the cameras, this was also another very interesting thing going on here. This iPad was giving you a 12 megapixel sensor on the backside and then a 7 megapixel front facing camera. The thing I will tell you about this particular lens is that this is actually like not that bad of a camera when it comes down to it. I'm actually kind of surprised at how good of a job this iPad kind of holds up with from this particular side. So the thing you have to keep in mind with this particular device is that for the most part, like if I'm going through and buying some sort of an iPad, I'm actually pretty happy about this camera. It's 4K 60 on the back, 1080p on the front, with very decent resolutions you can film in just from that particular perspective alone. But I also think like if I'm going through and if I'm buying some sort of another iPad, I actually like the fact that this thing holds up well from that particular standpoint because I don't have to worry about this iPad being outdated very soon or like having any other issues from that standpoint because it's going to hold up very well from that particular side. So I do think, this camera is about the same thing as an iPhone XR. I've said that for a couple of years from now, but like if you're getting any sort of iPad, you're going to know that this thing is basically right in line with an iPhone XR camera, which is perfectly fine. I love having that type of capability. And once again, this is a very, very good camera when it comes down to it. So again, it's not perfect by any means, but if I'm running through, grabbing a camera, this thing can get the job done. And I've actually filmed a couple videos from this iPad, actually. Some battery comparisons when all my batteries are charged, like all my iPhones or phones in general, just like sitting there like dying. I can just go and grab my iPad. This camera is actually pretty decent, and I've gotten some pretty good videos from this thing. But if you have an iPhone 10 or newer, just know that that camera is probably better than this particular iPad, but it's definitely not a bad camera on this thing either. So from that side, that kind of covers it up here. But in terms of software and longevity, this is the one area where we're probably going to be a little bit conflicted in. So here's the thing. This chipset is a little bit better than something like the iPhone XRs. So when you think about the iPhone XR, that is the oldest supported iPhone on iOS, 8 on iOS 17. It may be getting iOS 18, but we really don't know. The problem with this is that with the iPad, Pro, it actually has a better chipset than the iPhone XR. It's akin to something like the iPad Pro first generation. That iPad had the A9X chip inside, and that actually lasted longer than the iPhones that were based off that chipset, like the iPhone 6S. So with the iPhone XR, it could be the same thing here. If the iPhone XR ends up getting drop support on iOS 17, we could actually see a situation where the iPad Pro 2018 ends up getting an extra year or two of software updates on top of the iPhone XR. Again, we really have no idea. We're going to have to kind of wait and see what happens, but as of this point, that's kind of what we're seeing right now. Again, we'll have to see what happens, but that's kind of what we're seeing as of this point. So that kind of covers it up from there. On top of that, from a performance perspective, this thing has that Apple A12X Bionic chip inside with 4 gigabytes of RAM, but it does go up to 6 gigabytes of RAM if you get that 1 terabyte model. The thing I will tell you, I would still say 4 gigabytes of RAM inside of an iPad is still pretty good. It's not really like that terrible, and you can still get some really good performance from this type of iPad, which I actually like a lot. I think this iPad from that perspective holds up very, very well from that side, and I do think that is a very big thing going on for this particular device. Again, it's not a perfect device by any means, but I do think that if I'm going through and getting a good device, this thing is not bad at all. It can handle basically everything you throw at it. And if you're a student or you're an artist, you can take that Apple Pencil, because this thing does support Apple Pencil too. You can just slap that thing at the very top of this iPad and still get a really good have a good chipset, good amount of RAM, and have that Apple Pencil that will do you really well from that particular perspective as well, which I actually like a lot. So this in and of itself is another really cool thing going on for this particular iPad when it comes down to it. And to kind of sum up this video, what I'll definitely tell you is, I really like this particular device. I like the 2018 iPad Pro. Like I said before, I think Apple did a really good job when this iPad first came out, and I still think it's completely worth buying for sure. It's not perfect, but there are so many cool things going on for this particular device, and I still think it's very much worth buying. If you have more money, I would clearly recommend buying the iPad Pro, the M1 iPad Pro or the newest iPad Pro that's available. But if you're a little bit on a budget, this is a decent option. I also think the iPad Air 4 is probably a better one than this thing, but that one you're lacking ProMotion display. This one does have that ProMotion display, which makes me kind of swing for this one a little bit more. But I think this one is still very good. But just keep in mind, it may end up not getting maybe 2 more years of software support, but it's still supported as of this point. And I'd probably recommend buying it for a pretty good budget iPad. So that pretty much covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that will mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.